When it comes to Halo, some of the things that Luke and I really take a big interest in are definitely all of the different forms of cut content that Halo has had over the years. Whether it's things like weapons to vehicles to missions along the way, there's just something really intriguing about content that at least was considered or was even worked on heavily and then just didn't make the cut at the end. And when it comes to Halo and multiplayer maps, we do have some information about some multiplayer arenas or different multiplayer maps that just never made its way into full release, and looking behind the curtain as to what could have happened is definitely one of our favorite things when it comes to doing research on topics in the Halo universe. For instance, if we go all the way back to the Halo 2 days, there is some information about some maps that were supposed to be in this game for the multiplayer side of things that never actually made their way into the final release. Now, over the years, we've heard developers who worked at Bungie talk a bit about some of the processes that go into considering what maps would make the final cut. And early on during Halo 2's development, apparently 4 to 5 maps were cut out of the game altogether, and they were cut out relatively early on just based off of their block out stages. At the time, Max Hoberman talked about it in an interview and even went ahead to say that it was the right call to make at the time. Though interestingly enough, it does seem like back in Halo 2, a little bit more progress was made on a map that was going to be called Anchor Point, which would have taken place in a multiplayer version of the campaign level Arbiter. Vic DeLeon actually revealed this on Twitter, and interestingly enough, the level itself would have played more like a 2v2 Banshee aerial map, and that already sounds like a very ambitious type of multiplayer map compared to the different types of multiplayer maps that were core in Halo 2's release, but still interesting to think of what could have been had this level ended up releasing. Then during the development of the Halo 2 map pack, the Blastacular pack, it was actually supposed to release alongside 3 multiplayer maps, which would have been the 2 remake maps that we saw in the official release, Desolation and Tombstone, and there would have been a 3rd map that would have been brand new and original. Unfortunately though, the time that it would have taken to finish this map would have put the release date for the Blastacular pack back a bit, and it would have interfered with the timing of the Halo 3 beta release. So the 3rd map ended up getting scrapped altogether, though Max Hoberman has actually talked about that map and said that it had a lot of potential and it was coming along fairly well. There's little information still known about this map, and we haven't seen an official reveal or anything like that, though it was allegedly supposed to be asymmetrical, similar to that of Zanzibar, and would have had some different things in it as well, like possibly a light bridge which could be turned on or off by the various players on the field. All the way back in 2014, Max Hoberman did say he would like to see that map resurrected one day, though we haven't seen anything about it ever since. Also, while we're on the note of Halo 2, the level Lockout, which is definitely a fan favorite level when it comes to Halo 2 maps, was actually a level that was originally supposed to be in Halo Combat Evolved, which was called The Cage. Now, this map never ended up actually happening until a Halo Reach Forge recreation was made and shipped alongside the game, but nonetheless, it is interesting to look at some of the concept art for what this level would have been, and then to see how it evolved into Lockout for Halo 2. Now, we've already done an entire video on Lockout, and there's so much intricacy and just an interesting backstory behind that level. You should definitely go check it out if you haven't watched it already. Now, moving forward into things, Halo 3 is interesting because while a lot of the maps either use or used a different file name across the actual release or the multiplayer beta for the game, it is kind of interesting to see how some of the names changed along the way, like Chill was renamed to Narrows, Shrine was later Sandtrap, and Cyberdyne was the Pit. There's definitely not a lot that we know about the maps that were later scrapped on the cutting room floor for Halo 3, though the use of different names is really interesting, and it's something that they've done throughout the Halo games during development. For instance, if you go all the way back to the files for an early build of Combat Evolved, you could see that the map Battle Creek was actually called Beaver Creek, and then of course if you look to Halo 2, when they remade Battle Creek, they went ahead and kept it with the name Beaver Creek. But despite these variations of names, one thing is really interesting. In the beta build for Halo 3, there was a multiplayer map listing for a map called Warthog Inc., and the only description we have is Halo 3 Warthog Inc. I have no idea what this map would have been like, though it does sound very interesting. Now, interestingly enough, moving on to Halo Reach, we actually did get at least a little bit of insight to some of the maps or possible placeholders that survived being in the game files upon the game's official release. release. While we don't have too much context, and a lot of this will have to be assumption based off of what little information there is known about this and what the rest of the Halo community has speculated, there was supposedly at one point a listing in a directory for a map called Arena, and not much is known about it other than this stock art that was used in the files for the map, and it kind of connects the picture to the name, which is M Arena. Then there was another one called M_Azimuth. We don't know anything really about it. However, there's obvious reasons why some people suspected that this was a remake of the Halo 2 map Ascension, and that's just going off of the little image that's associated with the file. We don't really know too much more about it. However, interestingly enough, of course, Ascension was recreated in Forge World, but as a main map in the game and was in multiplayer, so perhaps it was scrapped in favor of Reach's Forge mode. Then another map was called M_Badlands, and this is another map we really don't know what the intentions or plans were. However, it looks like the opening area from the cutscene in Noble Actual. So maybe there was either intentions to let players play in this area at one point, or maybe this was just something that was used as a testing palette or something really early on in development that just managed to survive in the different iterations and builds of the game. Next on the list, there's a map called Blockout, and this is really interesting because there's actually concept art alongside this one, which does make it a little more confusing to figure out what on earth or what they could have been going for with this map. It doesn't really look like anything that's connected directly to any campaign level, and it kind of resembles something like a canyon with this massive storm or something. We don't know. But it is interesting though that this name of the map obviously sounds very eerily similar to that of Lockout. And we know that there was a Forge version of Lockout that was built that also never shipped alongside the game, which makes us wonder if during the earlier stages of development, maybe Lockout was in consideration for making a return, and then maybe it got moved like Ascension did to getting to be a Forge only map, only to be scrapped later on. That's just our speculation. Nonetheless, it is really interesting to take a look at. Then another one was called M_Farm, which is just a stock footage of a farm with a really cool looking rainbow, mind you. Nothing obviously is known about this other than the only farm you really experience in Halo Reach is in the beginning of Winter Contingency, so it is possible that maybe there was a plan for a multiplayer inspired map out of this. Perhaps it had something to do with the firefight version of the map later on. But nonetheless, while it was scrapped altogether, there is some remnants of some placeholder stuff that they maybe had in consideration. The next one being a little bit heartbreaking, there was one called M_Gulch, which of course looks like a Blood Gulch remake that would have been built as a standalone map at one point. However, obviously during the development of Forge World, they incorporated Blood Gulch to be this big open area that played a pretty big role on that map, and it's likely that either Blood Gulch was turned into Forge World, or instead when they were building Forge World, they constructed Blood Gulch within it and didn't have a use of having two Blood Gulches. But honestly, I'm a fan of every single iteration of Blood Gulch as it releases, so it would have been cool to see a Reach themed Blood Gulch that wasn't Forge World alongside Forge World also. I don't know, it's just an interesting idea. Then there was another map called Powerhouse. It's a little confusing because there was actually a map named Powerhouse that did ship in Reach, but this looks like a canceled map that had nothing to do with the other one. From the limited look that we can see of it, it looks like it may have been on top of a dam or just in a much bigger factory type setting. Then there was another file found in the directory called M_Pump_Station, and while we don't know too much about it other than this concept art that would have been involved with it, it does look like it is near some water, which does automatically make us think maybe with the mix of the Powerhouse map also being in this larger setting, there could be some connection there. Though honestly, that's complete speculation. Nobody really has a good idea as to what is in this concept art, and trying to put it together is a little bit difficult. Then interestingly enough, there was a file called M_Stalagmite, and it looks like some sort of ice cave. Maybe it was a remake of Waterworks from Halo 2, or maybe it was the underground section from the Halo Reach level, the package, but it looks like there was some ice, and interestingly enough, the art associated with this file does look somewhat unfinished, so we really don't know too much more than just what you can see here. Who knows what it could have been. Then there was a file called M_Spartanland, and while that sounds like a really fun Spartan themed amusement park, it isn't, but it is a really interesting map since you can see in the background of the little image we do have, there is a standalone gauze turret, which is so cool and something I would have loved to see added to the Forge sandbox. It definitely does share a lot of similarities to a Forge World aesthetic with some regular structures on top of that, so maybe there was some crossover there, or maybe, who knows, they were building their own base type map, and nonetheless, it is interesting to see something a little bit more in-game and finished with items placed around on it. And then there was one more file called M_aftship. And while we don't know too much about this map, it does look like you can see the Covenant carrier from the campaign level Long Night of Solace just in space, and there is a level file called 45_alt ship, which is the map Zealot. This has led some, including us, to speculate that maybe this was the multiplayer map that would have been used if the cut Saber Slayer game type did end up making its way into the final release of the game, but of course that ended up getting cut, so maybe there was no use for the map after all, or maybe it was just a completely different map. Okay, then the next couple of maps are really interesting because they come out of Halo Online, which was the canceled Halo game that was released in Russia, and then a lot of fans made a mod where other people could play it in custom games and other settings called El Dorito, and then it got DMCA'd or something and they couldn't release new updates. But nonetheless, the original Halo Online had some really interesting things, and one of those was a map called Waterfall, which is now being introduced into the Master Chief Collection, but it was a canceled map that was going to be in Halo Online that never ended up releasing, and now boom, it's in the Master Chief Collection, and it's something that players can now experience for the first time, and also is one of the first new Halo 3 maps in over a decade. Then it looks like there was also intentions to do another cold storage remake. This would likely be similar to how in Halo Online they took a few Halo 3 maps and remade them, with Avalanche being turned into Diamondback, which was like a desert themed version of the same map. And while we don't know too much more about it, there was a description for it that said the Swords of Sanghelios have not shared the reason for their interest in this seemingly abandoned logistics base. I don't know, maybe there was something more menacing hiding around the corner because of the term seemingly abandoned, but there was no reference to anything being cold, so maybe it was a cold storage remake without the cold, just storage. Maybe we're getting derailed just a little bit. Then there was another map called Dry Dock, which actually had some concept art on top of a map description that read, "The docking spires on High Charity serviced vessels from 100 worlds and a dozen species." And so this very likely sounds like some sort of docking station from High Charity, and it would be really interesting to see how that would have been built and constructed in Halo 3. Now, interestingly enough, there is different concept art for this map, with some of them being Covenant themed in High Charity and others being more UNSC themed. So maybe this map went through multiple iterations or ideas before they typed up the description on what they wanted to maybe go for, and then it got canceled altogether anyways. And it also looks like at one point they considered doing another remake of Lockout instead of, Blackout, but instead it would have been more in line with the Halo 4 Forerunner art aesthetic, looking almost like the Halo 4 map Haven, but obviously shaped out like Lockout. This concept art is surprisingly really interesting to look at, and it'd be really interesting to see what that would have been like had that ended up actually releasing in a game. Okay, but now we enter some territory on one of the most interesting canceled Halo maps that you probably never heard about. But there was this map that was going to be called Skybridge, and it was supposedly set in Seongnam, Korea. And while this is a real world current day city today, the concept art that we do see in game has a ton of really interesting art details on it. First of all, it looks like the whole map would have been set on an under construction skyscraper, and the skybox would have shown different companies like Cascade Stronghold Technologies, which appear in Halo 4 and onward. And it seems like the layout definitely looks very reminiscent to something like Narrows in Halo 3, or maybe even the Halo Combat Evolved PC map Japhyrophobia. It also looks like the map would have supported vehicles, meaning the bridge might have been a little bit wider, and man cannons similar to what you would see on Narrows would let you traverse the map even faster. And then with 343 rolling into Halo with Halo 4, they definitely kept a lot of things under wraps, though there were a few little things that kind of would sneak out in either concept art or a vidoc for a frame or two, and fans obviously paid very close attention back then when the hype of the next Halo game was at stake. There was some concept art that very much so resembles the under bridge section of the Halo 3 map Narrows, possibly meaning it was under consideration to be remade at some point. And in the Halo 4 look back trailer that was released just a year after Halo 4, you can see a short section where they're showing the development of Halo 4, and it appears that there's a map that very much so resembles Sand Trap, which means that there may have been a planned remake that ended up getting scrapped, or maybe they rebuilt Sand Trap or a Sand Trap-like level as a testing area for different types of vehicles and weapons. Nonetheless, we think this stuff is incredibly interesting, and we'd love to know what you think. Also, is there a map you would have really loved to play? Let us know in the comments down below. Also, make sure you guys are following us on Twitter and check out our podcast channel, link in the description down below. That's it for today though. We'll see you all next time with a new video.